Fed reinforcements from Panoramas and ordered to slowly pull back towards trenches that had been dug at the base of the city's walls. They did this to great effect, and Hasdrubal was drawn into an escalating fight over which he had less and less control. Punic elephant drivers charged and broke the thin Roman line, but then found themselves within range of defenders placed on the walls. Munitions had been stockpiled in anticipation of the Punic attack and were now being unleashed on the disorderly Carthaginians below. The elephants became wounded and were now sent stampeding right back into their own infantry forces behind them. At this point, Metellus unleashed a column of legionaries who had been hiding on the inside of the gates off to the side of the battle. The strike force quickly seized on the panic of the Carthaginians and landed a decisive flanking attack that shattered the army. In the rout, a majority of the elephants were killed or captured, and large numbers of troops were taken captive. This decisive battle marked the last of the massed land engagements of the First Punic War. In its wake, Rome found renewed spirits. During the campaigning season of 250 BC, both consuls decided to bring the fight to Lilybaeum once more, with the combined land and sea force totaling 110,000 men and 200 ships. Rome had improved their siege capability since the beginning of the war. The navy was primarily tasked with sealing off the harbor, while the army set to work constructing encircling fortifications. Early in the siege, however, Carthage sent a relieving force of 50 vessels carrying 10,000 mercenaries. These forces were able to use a favorable wind and their superior knowledge of the local shoal to sail into the harbor unopposed by the Romans in broad daylight. At night, the cavalry in the city were evacuated under the noses of unsuspecting forces. The removal of these unnecessary units helped to remove some hungry mouths from the city and compensate for the arrival of the newfound troops. The Roman commanders at sea were to be continually outdone by the skilled Punic sailors. A Carthaginian captain known as the Rhodian proved to be an extremely capable blockade runner. Numerous times he was able to outmaneuver the blockading ships. Even when 10 Roman ships were positioned to block his escape from the city, he still managed to humiliate his would-be captors and made it unopposed to the open sea. Instead of setting sail, the Rhodian offered battle to any who would dare attack him, an offer which the overawed Romans refused. In this way, the city was kept well supplied and in constant communication with Carthage. Rome then attempted to completely seal the harbor by dropping boulders in the channel. Though most of the stones were swept away, they caused enough of a buildup that one Carthaginian blockade runner got stuck during a night escape. The Romans seized the ship and discovered that it was an excellently constructed and nimble vessel. They then filled it with picked crew and a detachment of marines. When the Rhodian returned to Lilybaeum, he found himself unable to outrun this repurposed Roman ship and was captured. The stranglehold over the city's port was now noticeably tighter. Throughout this period, Rome's fleet also continued to assist Roman land forces. The huge manpower which was normally needed to row 200 Roman ships was put to work in the construction of the siege works. While this helped speed up the process, it caused a significant attrition rate on the sailors, who suffered from disease in the crowded camps and also suffered at the hand of enemy action. In response, the Senate drafted 10,000 rowers and had them sent overland to Lilybaeum. This did much to restore the strength of the fleet. Roman commanders judged that the reinforcements were not observed by the defenders and figured that an attack would not be expected. In 249 BC, the consul Publius Claudius Pulcher launched a surprise attack on the main Punic naval base at nearby Drepana. He figured that such a move would allow for the easy taking of a Carthaginian stronghold, and that the fall of this strategic base would precipitate the surrender of Lilybaeum. The attack was staged at night. Claudius ordered his forces to advance along the coast, but in the darkness they lost formation. When the sun rose, the Carthaginians were made aware of the Romans' approach. It soon became a race, as the Punic admiral Adherbal ordered his force of about 100 ships to sea before he could be sealed in to the port. This came as a bold move at the opportune moment, when the Romans were strung out in a long line with Claudius's flagship stuck in the back. Just as the first Roman ships entered the south of the harbor, Adherbal's flagship led the escape from the north. The Romans realized the danger and attempted to reform. The order caused chaos. Collisions in the harbor ensued, and many Roman ships had their oars sheared off by friendly forces. Claudius was able to gather his fleet into a rugged line, but by that time was already outflanked. Adherbal ordered the attack and ran the disorganized Roman line into the shore. It seems that the Roman vessels were not equipped with the corvus and could not fend off the Carthaginians as they had at the Battle of Ignomus. Now, the true skill of the Carthaginians shone through. They had also learned from past engagements and made sure ample groups of marines accompanied the sailors. Now with superior mobility, Adherbal's forces were able to ram and board the trapped Roman ships. The victory proved to be overwhelming. In all, around 93 Roman ships were sunk or captured, with only 30 making their escape. This was to be the first and only major naval victory celebrated by the Punic side. It would, however, be only the beginning of massive Roman setbacks at sea. Around the same time, the second consul of 249 BC, Lucius Junius Pullus, was leading a convoy to Lilybaeum. 120 warships escorted 800 transport vessels, which were carrying grain to resupply the besiegers. As the fleet made its advance, half of the force was halted to reform and wait for stragglers at Syracuse, while the rest pushed ahead. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians had sailed out from their victory at Drepana with 100 ships and attacked the Roman forces blocking the port of Lilybaeum. The Punic fleet caused serious havoc before retreating and making for the vulnerable Roman supply ships. The advanced Roman detachment, however, was forewarned of this danger by small scout ships that preceded the fleet. Rather than fight at sea, the Roman commanders had their ships drawn up on land by the nearest Roman-held town. There, they positioned their ships in a makeshift defensive line and reinforced the fortification with ballista from the town. This successfully deterred the Carthaginians from a major engagement and resulted in the loss of only several Roman ships. To the south, the majority of the Roman supply column was just rounding Cape Pacinus. Pullus was not aware of the recent Roman losses at the time, but remained wary of engaging such a strong Punic force. Instead, he led the mixed squadron of warships and transports cautiously along the coast. This move was observed by the Carthaginian admiral. Rather than engage in a similar fashion to the winning strategy at Drepana, he chose instead to sail immediately around the cape. This was done because the seasoned Carthaginian captains had spotted the signs of an approaching storm. They quickly ordered their ships to evacuate the exposed, rugged coast and seek shelter behind the cape. The Punic navy barely made it in time and was able to weather the gale in safety. The Romans, on the other hand, were caught in a punishing crosswind. With nowhere to escape, the entire fleet was smashed to pieces against the rocky cliffs. No certain count can be made of the sheer loss of life in this tragedy. However, the census at Rome before and after the event does show a drop of more than 50,000 citizens. This proved to be a devastating blow to Rome, especially in the wake of the disaster at Drepana. It would be several years before Rome could dare to tempt its fate at sea again. The battle on land, however, remained undiminished. At Lilybaeum the siege continued, but with little progress. Roman siege works were continuously counteracted by an extremely active defense force. Tunneling efforts successfully weakened many of Rome's attack ramps, while bold sallies by the Punic mercenaries continuously set fire to Rome's siege works. At the same time, the cavalry, which had been evacuated from the city, were landed further away and used to harass the enemy's rear lines. In this prolonged game of deadly attack and defend, the Romans suffered immensely due to Carthaginian actions and also deteriorating camp conditions. Despite this weakness, the Punic forces were never able to summon a large enough army to decisively break the siege. Instead, Hamilcar Barca resorted to guerrilla warfare. He arrived in Sicily in 247 BC to assume command of all Carthaginian land forces remaining on the island. This general is not only notable as an able commander, but also as the father of the famed Hannibal Barca. For nearly 3 years, he focused his attention on defending the vastly reduced territory remaining in Punic hands and stationed his base of operations near Panormus. From there, he would win many minor engagements, but a major victory would continue to elude him due to limited resources at his disposal. The lack of aid from Carthage can be traced back to the fact that resources had to be diverted to carry on campaigns against the tribes of North Africa. Nonetheless, in 244 BC, Hamilcar took the initiative and performed a surprise attack on the city of Ariox near Panormus and besieged nearby Romans for the rest of the year. By 243 BC, the Roman desire to return to sea was renewed. However, the state lacked the resources to create this new fleet and turned to private citizens for funds. The support poured in with the guarantee of repayment upon the recovery of the state's own funds. It is a testament to Rome's patriotic citizens that many did so with zero interest. Soon, 200 conquirums were assembled. In 242, the fleet was entrusted to the consul Caius Lutatius Catulus, who ensured that the sailors were trained daily until they had achieved a high level of proficiency. The Romans set about putting pressure on the harbors of Drepana and Lilybaeum. This had the dual effect of cutting off supplies to Hamilcar Barca and also provoking a response from the Carthaginian fleet. Carthage was slow to respond, but finally managed to assemble crews for 250 ships. While this force was exceptionally large, its captains had had to scrape the bottom of the barrel, so to speak, to find enough troops. As a result, the quality of this force was markedly lower than was typical. Faced off against Rome's well-drilled fleet, they may have even been, on average, less well-trained than their counterparts. Nonetheless, this fleet set off with the goal of finally supplying Hamilcar with the supplies and reinforcements he needed. It would then take on extra contingents of marines to seek out a decisive engagement with Rome. This naval force crossed the Mediterranean and halted at the westernmost of the Aegates Islands. There they awaited a favorable breeze to carry them the final stretch of the distance to Hamilcar's forces at Ariox. The Romans were by this time well aware of the huge Punic force's arrival. Catulus immediately boarded legionaries onto his ships and set out to intercept this force. He intended to prevent the Carthaginian fleet and army from linking up and joining forces. On the 10th of March, 241 BC, he was faced with a tough decision. The Punic fleet had finally found the favorable weather they needed to make the crossing and were setting sail for Ariox. This had to be prevented before Hamilcar's veteran troops could board the Carthaginian ships and make them substantially stronger. Contesting this crossing, however, meant fighting against the elements. The favorable winds which had aided the Punic crossing were blowing heavy swells towards the Romans. These weather conditions warranted serious consideration, given the numerous disasters which had befallen past Roman admirals, careless enough to ignore them. Catulus took the calculated risk and ordered his ships to attack. Roman crews battled through the high waves and proved capable sailors in pressing the assault. As this intercepting force approached, the Carthaginians were forced to drop their sails and prepare for battle. Despite having the weather acting against them, the Romans performed with demonstrable superiority. Punic crews were overloaded with supplies. As a result, they were extremely sluggish and outmaneuvered by the Roman ships that boarded or rammed them with near impunity.